My family betrayed me and kicked me out of my own home. But I came back with $1 million. I came back from a grueling work trip, carrying not only my suitcase, but also the hope of resting in the one place that made me feel safe, my home. The ride back had been filled with thoughts of relief, imagining myself walking into my room, seeing my things untouched, crashing on my bed after so many days away. However, the scene I found hit me like a punch straight to the chest. My mother, Amparo, looked at me from the living room with a hard expression, and beside her was my brother Nelson, laughing as if whatever was happening were amusing. I went upstairs with a knot in my stomach, and there in my own bed was Carla, my sister-in-law, lying down with insulting calm, as if she owned everything. The first thing I noticed was that my belongings were gone. My computer, my books, my keepsakes, everything I'd bought through sacrifice was no longer there. The room that had been my refuge had turned into a strange space, invaded by cheap perfumes, Carla's clothes, and a decor that had nothing to do with me. "We gave your room to Carla. We sold your things. And now you're leaving," my mother told me, without a shred of shame, as if she were saying the most normal thing in the world. At that moment, Nelson let out a mocking laugh, enjoying my shock. I couldn't help feeling my blood boil. For years, I'd shouldered the responsibility of keeping everyone under that roof, paying the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, everything that was needed. And instead of getting understanding or gratitude, what I got was betrayal, contempt, and even humiliation. I slowly opened my backpack, my heart pounding. Inside, I carried something that could change everything, something that, in seconds, would turn their laughter and mockery into pale faces of fear. My name is Alberto, and everything I was living through in that instant was the consequence of a chain of unappreciated sacrifices. It wasn't just about money or debts. It was the weight of carrying a family that never understood what gratitude was. To the outside world, I might have been a hard-working, responsible man, someone who managed to buy a house at 28. But in my own home, I was treated like an ATM, like someone who had to put up with everything just because I was a son and a brother. 5 years earlier, I had signed that mortgage with the hope of giving them a better future. It wasn't a mansion, but it had 3 bedrooms, a patio where I dreamed of seeing plants grow, and a kitchen where my mother could prepare her endless stews. The debt was high, and there were nights when insomnia kept me company as I wondered how I'd make it to the end of the month. But I did it convinced it was worth it. I thought that, over time, my parents and Nelson would pitch in somehow, that they would know how to value my effort. That illusion turned into a prison. The mortgage tied me down for years with payments that ate up a large part of my paycheck. Every time I got paid, the first thing I did was set aside the bank share because I knew that if I didn't, I'd lose everything. Still, I never saw it as a sacrifice just for me. I did it thinking of giving stability to my mother Amparo, my father Ramon, and Nelson. My father had been unemployed for years, stuck in a routine of TV and silence. My mother had never worked outside the home, and my brother always found ways to dodge any real responsibility. I imagined that, in time, at least they would be grateful or contribute something, but it never happened. During the first few months, everything seemed to work. My mother cooked and cleaned, and Nelson came home with stories about supposed business ventures that never took off. I worked as a sales coordinator at a tech company. It wasn't a huge salary, but it was enough to pay the mortgage, cover utilities and food, and support everyone. I felt proud, convinced I was building something for the future. I saw the house as an investment in family unity, a place that would keep us together despite the hardships. But time passed, and reality destroyed any illusion. Months turned into years, and nothing changed. My father stayed glued to the TV, indifferent to what was happening around him. My mother started complaining that the house wasn't enough, that it lacked space, that the finishes weren't luxurious. And Nelson, instead of growing up, decided to marry Carla, a woman who gave me a bad feeling from day one. She moved into the house as if it were an acquired right, and from then on, my burden only multiplied. Remember, if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Carla was the kind of person who knows how to disguise her intentions with smiles and sweet words, but there was always poison behind every phrase. In no time, she had installed herself as queen of the place, demanding comforts and mocking any attempt I made to set boundaries. "Alberto, you're an angel for everything you do for us," my mother said at first, with a smile that seemed sincere. But soon those words faded, replaced by criticism, demands, and senseless complaints. I was the one paying for everything. The mortgage, food, utilities, internet, absolutely every expense. Meanwhile, the others lived as if they were in a luxury hotel, and I were the waiter who had to serve them without protest. Every time I tried to talk about responsibilities, they looked at me as if I were speaking a language they didn't understand. "That's your problem, Alberto. You're the one who wanted this house," my mother told me once. Nelson, with a mocking smile, added, "You decided to play the hero, so don't complain." In those moments, I felt they were stealing my life, minute by minute, without caring in the least. The years moved on, and each day I felt the noose tighten around my neck. The house that had once filled me with pride became a constant reminder that my sacrifice meant nothing to the people living under that roof. My father, Ramon, limited himself to grunting now and then while changing TV channels, completely detached from reality. My mother, Amparo, started demanding absurd things: larger TVs, better cuts of meat, even new clothes, as if I were an inexhaustible provider. And Nelson, my brother, never lagged in his supposed businesses. He constantly asked me for money, promising that this time it would work, but it always ended the same way: failures, debts, and the cynical smile of someone who never planned to pay a single peso back. Carla, for her part, was the one who most got under my skin. Her attitude was loaded with contempt disguised as sarcasm. She walked around the house like a queen, as if everything belonged to her. She asked for phones, clothes, makeup, and did it with that little laugh that felt like a dagger straight to my nerves. "You make good money, right, brother-in-law? Don't be stingy," she'd say every time she wanted something. And no matter how hard I tried to keep calm, I couldn't stand how she took advantage of me. I tried several times to sit them down and speak plainly. I explained that money doesn't grow on trees, that the mortgage was choking me, that I needed help. I wasn't asking them to give me all the money in the world, just to contribute something, anything. However, the response was always the same. My mother, in a scolding tone, said nobody had asked me to buy the house. That was my responsibility. Nelson openly mocked me, insisting I'd put that burden on myself by wanting to play the hero. Meanwhile, Carla laughed in silence, enjoying the show. Each month became torture. I'd open my ledger and watch how the money evaporated between the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and the house's endless whims. I worked overtime, took on additional projects, juggled my time and my health, but it wasn't enough. The savings I once had vanished quietly, and every day I was closer to going broke. What had once been a dream had turned into a prison with no way out, and my jailers were exactly the people who should have supported me. I clearly remember one night when I couldn't take it anymore. I gathered them all in the living room and spoke from the heart. I told them that if we didn't start working as a team, we were going to lose the house, that the bank wouldn't wait forever, that I needed them to look for work or at least contribute something concrete. At first I got silence, and then mockery and hurtful comments. "And what do you want me to do, Alberto? Start selling tamales on the corner?" My mother laughed with disdain. Nelson shrugged and told me I always figured it out, that I was the genius of the family. That night, I locked myself in my room, feeling more alone than ever. Frustration and exhaustion built up inside me like a poison with nowhere to go. I spent my days at work trying to keep a smile on my face, but inside I was consumed by resentment. It wasn't just the financial burden, it was my family's indifference, the constant mockery, the total lack of empathy. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the exhausted man staring back, dark circles under his eyes and slumped shoulders. I'd lost weight. I'd lost motivation. And worst of all, I was losing faith in the people I was supposed to love the most. One night, after another tiring day at the office, I came home hoping to find at least a little peace. Instead, I walked into an absurd argument in the living room. My father was complaining that the 32-inch TV wasn't enough, that the neighbors had a bigger, better one. My mother chimed in, saying the meat I bought was tough and that I should get a more expensive, more tender cut. Carla wanted a new phone because hers was already old, and Nelson insisted I lend him money for yet another of his fantasy projects. That's when I felt my patience shatter into 1,000 pieces. I tried to keep calm and remind them of everything I'd done for them, but all I got were laughs and snide remarks. They told me to stop whining, that I decided to buy the house, and now I had to deal with it. Nelson even said he was tired of hearing my complaints, that if I couldn't handle the burden, I should just leave the house. My mother, as always, kept quiet until I blew up, and then she took Nelson and Carla's side, as if my words had no value whatsoever. That's when I realized I was trapped in an emotional snare. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to help me. They weren't going to value my sacrifices. They were comfortable living off me, and as long as I kept giving in, they'd never have a reason to do anything different. That night, I went to bed with a mix of rage and sadness, but also with a spark of determination. I knew I couldn't go on like that I needed a way out before everything collapsed. Soon after, fate placed an opportunity in my hands. One morning, in the middle of accumulated fatigue, my boss called me into his office. A chill ran down my spine as I walked in, because the company wasn't doing well and I thought I was going to get fired. But what he told me changed my life. There was a massive contract on the line with a foreign client, $1 million project that could save the company. And I was the one chosen to close it. Not only that, my commission would be so big it could completely change my financial situation. That offer was like a light in the dark. When my boss explained the details, I felt air fill my lungs again after years of suffocation. The contract with that foreign client didn't just mean the company's salvation. It also meant a chance to prove to myself that I could pull off something big. "Alberto, I trust you because you're the best we've got," he told me, with a smile that might have been sincere or calculated. But in that moment, it became a boost. It would be a 5-day trip to meet this demanding client and close a multi-million deal. My future, my house, and even my dignity were on the line. I accepted without hesitation. There was no room for indecision. The bank had already sent notices threatening to start foreclosure if I didn't pay the overdue installments in the coming days. This was my last shot at turning everything around, to stop what I'd worked so hard for from slipping through my fingers. That very night, I told my family the news, hoping that, if only for a moment, they'd be happy for me, that they'd see I was still fighting to keep them under that roof. But what I got was the opposite. My mother, Amparo, looked at me with disdain and, raising an eyebrow, said, "And what if you fail? You'll make a fool of yourself like always." Nelson, with that mocking smile I despised, added, "Don't get too excited. You'll come back empty-handed." Carla didn't need to say a word. Her contemptuous stare said it all. At that moment, I knew I couldn't expect anything from them. Not support, not encouragement, not even a token gesture. I swallowed my anger and went to my room. I spent the days before the trip working harder than ever. I prepped presentations, researched every detail about the client, and practiced in front of the mirror until every phrase and argument was pitch perfect. I barely slept a few hours, but I didn't care. I knew that contract wasn't just for the company. It was my last bullet to save the house and prove I wasn't the failure my family painted me to be. The day of the trip arrived, and I said goodbye with a knot in my stomach. No one wished me luck. My mother only told me not to forget to turn off the lights before leaving. Nelson and Carla were discussing what they'd buy with the money we'd soon have, and my father, as always, didn't even look up from the TV. I boarded the plane determined not to fail, that those 5 days would be decisive for the rest of my life. The days abroad were a constant battle. The client was a tough businessman, used to testing anyone who wanted to do business with him. His questions were disguised traps, and his cold gestures made me sweat as if I were under interrogation. But I was prepared. Every night in the hotel room, I reviewed my notes, adjusted my strategy, and rehearsed my answers. I slept only a few hours with the suit hanging on a chair and the briefcase with my documents by the bed, reminding me I couldn't afford a mistake. The sessions were intense. There were moments when I felt everything collapsing, that the client wouldn't budge. But inside me, there was a force that wouldn't let me give up. Whenever I felt I was about to break, I thought of Nelson's laughter, my mother's coldness, my father's indifference, and Carla's arrogance. They believed I would fail, and that thought became the fuel pushing me forward. On the fifth day, after countless meetings, working dinners, and tense discussions, the decisive moment arrived. I laid the final proposal on the table, every word measured, every figure calculated to sound attractive yet fair. The client's silence felt eternal, as if he were evaluating not just the numbers, but me as a person. Finally, he nodded and extended his hand. In that gesture was my victory. The contract was closed. Emotion flooded me. My boss called that same night euphoric. Alberto, this is historic. The company is saved, and you've just secured a commission that will change your life. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Not only had I delivered, I'd exceeded every expectation. The first thing I thought of was the house, how that money would be my salvation with the bank and my silent revenge against those who had doubted me. When I got back to the city, I stopped by the office first. My boss handed me a briefcase with part of the commission in cash, at my request. The rest would arrive via bank transfer. That briefcase felt heavier than I imagined, not just because of the bills inside, but because it was the tangible proof that I'd made it. I put it in my travel backpack, zipped it tight, and headed straight home, not suspecting that there I'd face the most painful betrayal of all. It was nighttime when I arrived home, exhausted, but with my heart full of renewed hope. I'd spent the last 5 days in uncomfortable hotels, eating at odd hours and barely sleeping. So all I wanted was to rest in my bed, the one I'd dreamed of during the fatigue of the trip. I opened the door with a mix of pride and relief. I carried with me the briefcase with the money that meant the salvation of my efforts. I felt victorious, though tired, and expected to find, even for an instant, some peace. However, the atmosphere in the house was strangely silent. No laughter, no arguments, not even the sound of my father's TV. I climbed the stairs, walking wearily but eagerly, wanting to throw myself on the bed and finally sleep. When I opened my bedroom door, the shock was like a bucket of ice water. There was Carla, my sister-in-law, lying calmly in my bed, covered only by a sheet that revealed her brazen attitude. The room was unrecognizable. My books, my computer, my TV, everything I'd gathered over years of effort gone. In their place were cheap perfumes, women's clothes, makeup kits scattered across the table, and a ridiculous pink lamp whose garish light seemed to mock me. Rage surged in my throat. "What the hell are you doing here, Carla?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. She slowly propped herself up with a mocking smile and replied with unbearable calm. "Oh, brother-in-law, you're back. Too bad for you. They told me you can't pay for this house anymore. Shame you're poor again." That sentence was gasoline on a fire. I stepped forward, demanding she get out of my room immediately, reminding her it was mine and she had no right to be there. But before I could say anything else, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there were my mother, Amparo, and my brother, Nelson, standing in the hallway. They showed no surprise, no embarrassment, much less shame. They just looked at me with contempt, as if I were the intruder in my own home. "Show some respect, Alberto," my mother said, crossing her arms with a hard expression. "You have no right to be here anymore." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean I have no right? This is my house. I bought it. I paid for it," I shouted beside myself. Nelson let out a sarcastic laugh. "Your house? Not anymore, little brother. You can't pay for it. You're finished." In that instant, I realized I wasn't just facing ingratitude. I was facing a betrayal planned and executed with the coldness of people who had never seen me as family. My mother stepped forward and, with cruel calm, delivered the sentence. "We gave your room to Carla. She offered to make the house payments, something you couldn't do because you're a failure. We sold your things to cover some expenses, so it's best if you leave." Each word fell like a hammer. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house I had bought with my sweat, with sleepless nights, with sacrifices in my youth, was now treated as if it had never been mine. Pain mixed with a burning fury. I felt like they were ripping out my heart with their mockery. Nelson kept laughing. Carla watched me with that poisonous smile, savoring my suffering. And my mother looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You want me to leave?" I replied with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. "Fine, I'll go. But first I want to show you something." I opened my backpack slowly, savoring the silence that filled the room. They all stared, convinced I was defeated. But when I set the briefcase on the bed, right in front of Carla, their faces changed. She looked at it first with curiosity, thinking it was some unimportant document. But when I flipped the latches and let the high-denomination bills spill into view, the air froze. Silence. The mocking smiles vanished, and their expressions shifted from scorn to shock in a matter of seconds. They turned pale, as if they'd seen a ghost. I couldn't help but laugh. The irony was too delicious. They tried to humiliate me, to kick me out and erase me from my own house. And now the proof of my triumph lay before their eyes. "Carla won't need to pay anything," I said firmly, looking at my mother and Nelson. "I'm paying off this house in full, right now." I looked at them one by one, savoring their confusion. I closed the company's biggest deal ever, and they rewarded me for it. $1 million. How does that sound for a failure? Carla jumped out of bed, eyes wide, unable to hide her shock. My mother stammered incoherently, as if she'd forgotten how to speak. And Nelson, mouth agape, couldn't tear his eyes from the money. For the first time in years, they were silent, and I was in control. My mother's face was the first to attempt recovery. In a trembling voice, she tried to soften the situation. "Alberto, son, we always believed in you. We knew you'd make it." But her words sounded hollow, empty, devoid of truth. They were nothing but a desperate attempt to erase years of indifference and mockery. Nelson, nervous, forced a smile. "Yeah, bro, we never doubted you. This is incredible. Congratulations." His tone was so fake it made me nauseous. And Carla, the one who despised me minutes earlier, slowly approached the briefcase as if to touch it, her newfound sweetness making my stomach turn. "Brother-in-law, what a pleasant surprise. I knew you'd succeed." I stared at them, one by one, feeling a mix of disgust and satisfaction. For years they had treated me like a walking wallet. They had sold my belongings, insulted me, called me a failure. And now, faced with money, they wanted closeness back, as if sudden kindness could erase all the poison they'd spewed. I refused to play along. I snapped the briefcase shut, slid it back into my backpack, and, firmly, delivered the words that froze their blood. "You have until tomorrow to get out of my house. No negotiation. No going back. Pack your things and leave." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. The incredulity on their faces was almost comical, as if they couldn't grasp that I was serious. My mother spoke first. In tears, she screamed, "Alberto, you can't do this to us. We're your family. Family supports each other." Her broken voice rang through the room, but it no longer had any effect on me. Nelson stepped forward, pleading, "Brother, please don't be like that. We can fix this. We're blood. You can't throw us into the street." But his words weren't sincere, just fear dressed up as affection. Fear of losing the comfort they'd enjoyed at my expense for years. Carla didn't beg. She looked at me with a mix of hatred and fear, as if trying to figure out whether I would really follow through. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence said it all. She was furious at losing the free, cushy life she'd found in my house. That night, after closing the briefcase and making it clear there was no turning back, I decided to sleep on the sofa. I didn't care about the back pain or the discomfort. All I felt was a cold calm. I knew the next day my life would change forever. At dawn, I woke with an aching body but a clearer mind than ever. The first thing I did was check the briefcase. The bills were still there, perfectly in place, reminding me of what I'd achieved. I showered, put on my best shirt, and stowed the briefcase in my backpack. Before leaving, I looked around the house one more time. The walls I'd painted, the furniture I'd bought, every corner I'd kept standing with my effort. And I thought, this nightmare ends today. I drove to the bank with a mix of nerves and determination. The branch was almost empty when I walked in, and the employee who attended me widened her eyes at the amount of cash I was carrying. I explained that I wanted to pay off the mortgage in full, cover every overdue installment, and any penalties. She asked, incredulous, if I was sure about paying it all in cash. I smiled, absolutely sure. I don't want anyone to ever claim this house again. The transaction took nearly 2 hours. They counted bill by bill, checked my documents, and filled out endless forms. As it all progressed, I felt a mix of pride and relief. When they finally handed me the document certifying that the house was free of debt, I held it with trembling hands. It was the title, paper that represented not just a house, but my freedom, my effort, and victory over those who had tried to sink me. I left the bank with my heart racing. The sun seemed brighter. The air tasted different. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my destiny. With the title in hand, I knew I had irrefutable proof, a document that would silence every lie. As I drove back home, I pictured the moment I'd show it to them and force them to accept the truth. That house wasn't theirs, never had been. It was always mine. When I got home in the afternoon, I expected to find them packing, understanding that my ultimatum was final. But reality hit me like a sledgehammer. The house looked exactly like the night before. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee, as if nothing had happened. My father was watching his soap opera with indifference, and Nelson and Carla were laughing in the dining room. My room was still occupied with Carla's things. It was obvious they had decided to ignore my warning, as if my words carried no weight. That's when I realized the real showdown was just beginning. I walked into the living room with steady steps, holding the folder with the freshly issued property title. The smell of fresh coffee felt unbearably ironic. My mother acted as if nothing had happened, as if my ultimatum had been a childish tantrum. "What are you still doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling with contained fury. "I told you you had until today to leave." My mother looked up from her cup and gave me a pitying look. "Oh, Alberto, don't be dramatic. We're your family. You're not going to throw us out like strangers." Nelson stood from the table, wearing his usual arrogant smile. "Do you really think we're leaving? This house is ours, too. We all live here. You can't just kick us out." His words were equal parts brazenness and defiance, as if he still had power over me. Carla came closer as well, arms crossed, and that venomous look I despised. "And don't you think you're being a bit selfish, brother-in-law? That money you brought is for all of us. After all, we've always supported you, right?" I stayed quiet for a few seconds, trying to process the magnitude of their cynicism. Support me? Them? The same people who ridiculed me, sold my belongings, called me a failure while I covered every expense? Heat flared inside me, rising from my stomach to my throat. "Support me?" I shouted, stepping toward them, eyes blazing. "I paid for this house. I put food on the table. I paid the electricity, water, internet, everything. You haven't lifted a finger in years, and you have the gall to say it belongs to everyone." That's when my father, Ramon, silent up to that point in front of the TV, spoke for the first time in ages. Without even looking at me, in his low, tired voice, he said, "Keep your voice down, Alberto. Don't be ungrateful. We raised you, gave you what we could. The least you can do is share." Those words were the last straw. My mother's betrayal and Nelson's mockery hurt. But hearing my own father use my upbringing as an excuse to exploit me felt like a knife to the heart. Without another word, I opened the folder and took out the title deed. I held it high so they could see the official seal and my name printed clearly. "See this?" I said, voice firm and sharp. "This house is mine. I paid it in full this morning. I don't owe the bank a cent, and I owe you even less. I told you to leave, and I meant it. You have no right to be here one more day." The silence that followed was deafening. Remember, if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Reactions came quickly. My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled, unable to form words. Nelson stared at the document as if it were a mirage, unable to accept the truth before him. Carla, for the first time, lost that smirk that infuriated me. Her face hardened, showing a silent fury that seemed to swallow her whole. Only my father kept the same indifference, turning his gaze back to the TV as if that paper meant nothing. I stepped forward and continued. "If you don't leave willingly, I'll make you leave. I'm not playing games. This is my house, and I won't tolerate being treated like your servant anymore." My voice sounded stronger than I expected, charged with the determination I'd bottled up for years. The tension was so thick you could feel it in the air. For a moment, I thought they would finally give in, that they'd understand they had no choice. I was wrong. My mother burst into tears and lunged for my arm. "Alberto, please. You can't do this to us. We're your family. Family supports each other in hard times." I looked her in the eyes and felt the anger boil again. "Support me?" I repeated, voice low and grave. "When did you ever support me? When you sold my things without asking? When you called me a failure? When you gave my room to Carla?" Her tears no longer moved me. They weren't tears of love, but of fear at losing the comfort I had provided. Nelson tried to intervene, raising his hands as if to calm me. "Let's talk like men, brother. Don't do something you'll regret. We can work it out." I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "There's nothing to work out. You have 1 hour to pack and get out of my house. If you don't, I'll call the police." The weight of my words felt like a hammer, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear in their eyes. I didn't want to hear more. I left the living room with my heart pounding and sat in my car parked out front. I on my phone, breathing deeply. Part of me hoped they would comply, pack their things, and leave quietly. But I knew my family too well. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The battle was only beginning. The hour I'd given them passed, and I went back inside with a tight chest, expecting to see packed bags and a resigned silence. Instead, what I found confirmed my suspicions. They hadn't packed a thing. My mother was in the kitchen, crying over a cup of coffee, as if her tears could manipulate me. Nelson and Carlo whispered angrily at the dining table, faces tense with bottled rage. My father, true to form, remained on the couch watching TV, unmoved, as if the world could collapse around him and he wouldn't care. My patience was gone. I stood at the center of the room and spoke firmly. "Time's up. I warned you what would happen if you didn't listen. Now you'll face the consequences." I grabbed my phone and dialed the police without hesitation. I could feel all their eyes on me, some pleading, others full of hate, but none showing a trace of remorse. When I explained the situation to the officer, my words were clear and direct. "I need you to come to my home. There are people refusing to leave my property. I have the title in my name and can prove it." As I hung up, my mother threw herself at me, tears streaming down her face. "Alberto, don't do this. I'm your mother. You can't throw us out like garbage." I didn't meet her gaze. I answered coldly, "You treated me like garbage first. Now it's time to face the consequences of your actions." The hardness in my voice seemed to pierce her, but I didn't waver. The anger and pain I'd accumulated for years now served my resolve. 30 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the house. Out stepped 2 officers, a robust man with a firm look and a young woman radiating professionalism. Seeing them enter, my family froze. The male officer asked me for an explanation, and, after I showed him the title and described what happened, he sided with me immediately. Turning to them, he spoke seriously. "Folks, Mr. Alberto is the legal owner of this residence. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you out." Chaos erupted. My mother broke into hysterical sobs, screaming it was unfair, that I was a heartless, ungrateful son. Her hands trembled around a handkerchief, but her words carried more manipulation than genuine pain. Nelson tried to negotiate, his pleading tone a far cry from the arrogance he always showed me. "Officer, this is a family matter. We don't need your intervention. We can resolve it among ourselves." The officer's cold stare shut him up immediately. Carla, on the other hand, stayed silent. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and though she looked calm, you could tell her mind was plotting. She'd never been one to cry or beg. Her way of fighting was poison in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. Even so, she seemed defeated in the face of authority. My father got up from the couch for the first time in a long while, shuffling his feet in resignation. When the female officer asked him to gather his things, he didn't protest. He just sighed and nodded. Watching the scene was a whirlwind of emotions I can hardly describe. On the one hand, I felt immense relief, justice, finally. The weight I'd carried for years began to lift. But at the same time, there was a sharp pain deep in my chest. Seeing my mother sobbing, Nelson with a lost look, Carla seething, and my father defeated, reminded me that, despite everything, they were my blood. The contradiction tore at me, but I knew I couldn't waver. The officers began escorting them toward the door. My mother clutched at anything she could, saying she couldn't leave her home. Nelson muttered curses under his breath, blaming me for his misfortune. Carla hurriedly dragged a suitcase full of clothes and makeup, her face hardened by fury. My father walked slowly, without looking back, as if he carried not only his belongings but also the weight of his failure. Before getting into the taxi they'd called, my mother turned to me. Her eyes were red, her voice raw, and she hurled the final stab. "I will never forgive you for this, Alberto. You're a monster." I closed my eyes for a second, but didn't answer. I simply shut the door behind them. The house, after years, fell silent. A dense, strange, but liberating silence. I sat on the empty sofa and took a long breath. The weight of a lifetime began to lift from my shoulders, though I knew the wound of betrayal would bleed for a long time. That night, I stayed in the living room, sitting on the sofa, surrounded by an overwhelming quiet. The absence of their voices, demands, and constant arguments transformed the house's atmosphere into something unfamiliar. For the first time in a long time, no one yelled at me to buy softer meat. No one asked for money for a ridiculous business. No one demanded a bigger TV. It was almost ghostly calm, but also relief. I inhaled deeply and felt air move through my lungs in a new way, as if I were breathing freedom. At dawn, I woke sore from sleeping on the couch, but with a clear head. I checked the briefcase, still intact, every bill in place, reminding me what I'd achieved. Then I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The reflection showed a tired man with deep circles under his eyes, but also a new brightness, the shine of someone who had won a battle that once seemed impossible. I promised myself I'd never again let anyone treat me like a slave in my own home. That same day, I began making changes. I replaced every lock in the house, making sure none of them could come back inside. It was symbolic but powerful. Each turn of the key reminded me I'd regained control of my life. Then I hired a cleaning service to disinfect every corner, especially my room, the one Carla had invaded. Watching them remove those cheap perfumes, the pink lamp, and all the trash they'd left behind felt like tearing out a disease that had been consuming me. Over time, I replaced each item they'd sold or destroyed. I bought a new TV, a better computer, a sturdy, comfortable desk. Each purchase was an act of defiance, a personal statement that nothing they took from me would hold me back. Little by little, the house regained its essence, and this time, without the poison of those who had turned it into a prison. I walked down the hallways with a strange feeling, as if rediscovering a place that had always belonged to me, but that I'd never been able to enjoy fully. Even so, I couldn't deny the sting in my chest. Yes, I had won. I'd gotten back what was mine, but I had also lost my family. Though they had betrayed me, treated me like a stranger, they were still my mother, my father, and my brother. That emptiness was inevitable, and while I tried to ignore it, it surfaced in the quietest moments, when I ate dinner alone or when the echo of silence filled the living room. It was the price of my freedom, and I was willing to pay it. The following days were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. On one hand, I savored the quiet of my home and the freedom to make decisions without anyone hovering, complaining, or manipulating me. For the first time, I could sit in the living room and watch a movie without my father grabbing the remote. I could cook whatever I wanted without my mother's complaints, and I could rest without Nelson asking for money. But on the other hand, the absolute silence reminded me of what I'd lost. On the second day, the call started. My mother was the first to appear on my phone screen. She left voice messages full of tears and pleas. "Alberto, please think it over. We're your family. You can't leave us on the street. Where is your heart?" I listened to the first one with a mix of anger and sadness, but deleted the rest without opening them. I knew her words weren't sincere, that they didn't come from love, but from the fear of losing the comfort they'd grown used to. Then came Nelson. At first, he tried to sound conciliatory, almost kind. "Brother, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. Let me come back. I swear I'll change. His messages sounded rehearsed, full of empty promises. When he realized I wouldn't answer, his tone flipped. You're selfish, Alberto. You're going to pay for this. No one will love you after what you did. I read those words and smiled bitterly. For years, he'd manipulated me with fake brotherhood, and now he showed his real face. Curiously, Carla never called. Maybe because she knew she had nothing to offer and nothing to demand. Her silence was a mute confession that the only thing she cared about was money, and losing it meant losing me as a target. My father didn't reach out, either. It didn't surprise me. Indifference had always been his weapon, and, I suppose, in his mind, he simply decided to keep ignoring me. The weight of those calls lessened as days passed. My hands no longer shook when I heard my mother's voice, and my blood no longer boiled at Nelson's threats. On the contrary, each attempt to contact me reminded me I'd done the right thing, that I couldn't let them drag me back into that bottomless pit. Freedom, though painful, began settling into me as a new way of life. Weeks went by, and my family's life, now outside my house, began to crumble. I heard from neighbors and acquaintances that they no longer lived as comfortably as before. The comfort they'd clung to evaporated in days. My mother, Amparo, ended up working as a house cleaner, something she had always despised as beneath her. The woman who told me I had to support them because she wasn't made for miserable little jobs now had to earn her own bread. Nelson lost the mask of would-be entrepreneur he'd worn all his life. I saw him handing out flyers downtown, head down, defeated. His promises of million-dollar businesses, his dreams of grandeur, his arrogant lines, reduced to a job that barely kept him afloat. The man who laughed at my warnings, who called me a failure, now stood as a mirror of his own mediocrity. My father, Ramon, also had to face a hard reality. He got a job as a night security guard in a parking lot, working graveyard shifts to make ends meet. The same man who criticized me for not giving them everything now spent entire nights in an uncomfortable chair, enduring cold and loneliness while watching over cars that weren't his. His years of indifference had turned into resigned silence. And Carla, the woman who had turned my life into a torment, who paraded through my home like a queen of a palace that wasn't hers, soon showed her true colors. As soon as things got tough, she left Nelson. She asked for a divorce shortly after the eviction, saying she wouldn't stay with a poor failure. The irony drew a bitter smile. The woman who mocked me for being poor ended up humiliating my brother for the same reason. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would, not the way I imagined. I believed I'd enjoy watching them pay for their actions, but what I felt was a strange mix of compassion and distance. They were no longer part of my life, and their misfortunes weren't mine to carry. For the first time, I understood that true victory wasn't in seeing them fall, but in knowing I was no longer responsible for picking them up. Meanwhile, I began to rediscover my own life. The house slowly filled with a different energy, lighter, more authentic. I walked through each room and felt, finally, that the space was mine. No one took my bed. No one criticized my cooking. No one complained about the TV size. The silence that once hurt became my ally, a calm presence reminding me I was free. I started investing in myself. I bought new furniture, painted the walls with colors that brought me peace and joy, and set up my room to reflect who I really am. Every corner became a mirror of my identity, not of others' demands. I even allowed myself some luxuries, a modern sound system, a spacious desk for comfortable work. It wasn't just material change. It was a declaration of independence. Nights, once a battleground of family fights and endless complaints, turned into moments of calm. I could sit on the sofa with a glass of wine, look out the window, and hear only my own thoughts. No demands, no mockery, no one draining my energy. For the first time in years, I slept deeply, without the weight of emotional debts imposed on me. My phone still rang from time to time, voicemails from my mother, missed calls from Nelson, even unknown numbers I assumed were third-party attempts to reach me. But my hands no longer trembled. With each passing day, I learned to ignore them more easily, like tuning out an annoying echo. I knew those voices only sought to drag me back into the darkness I had escaped. One day, while reviewing the house documents, holding the title in my hands, I understood that what I'd gained wasn't just a debt-free roof. I'd gained freedom, dignity, the right to decide my life without anyone treating me like an instrument. The journey had been painful and lonely, but necessary. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. As the months passed, my life took a different course. The emptiness I'd felt at first from losing my family was slowly replaced by lightness. It wasn't easy to accept that the people I'd given everything to had betrayed me, but I learned it had been necessary to open my eyes and stop living in chains. The house, now completely mine, became a refuge that spoke of my sacrifice and resilience. Every wall, every new piece of furniture, reminded me I'd achieved the impossible. I poured myself into work with renewed strength. Closing that million-dollar contract not only saved the company, it opened doors for me. My bosses began to trust me, to give me more responsibility and better opportunities. Suddenly, what seemed like a downhill slide turned into a steady climb. My bank account grew, my savings multiplied, and with each achievement, I felt I reclaimed a piece of the dignity my family had tried to strip away. But the most important thing wasn't the money. It was the peace I found within. I discovered solitude wasn't a punishment. It was a chance to know myself better. I learned to enjoy my own company, cooking a quiet dinner, reading without interruptions, listening to music without turning it down because someone complained. Small things, but they gave me back the sense that at last I lived for me, not to please others. Sometimes nostalgia hit. I remembered imagining my mother happily cooking in that house, my father helping me in the yard, Nelson being a real brother. Those memories were mirages, dreams that never came true. Sadness for what could have been sometimes made me sigh, but never cry. I realized I hadn't lost what never really existed, a family that valued me. One afternoon, sitting on the balcony watching the sun slip below the horizon, I caught myself smiling for no reason. I'd been through hell and come out alive, stronger and more aware. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that simple, undeniable truth filled me more than any approval I'd ever sought from them. News of my family reached me through others, but it no longer affected me the same way. My mother kept working from house to house. Nelson scraped by with temp jobs. My father grew quieter than ever, almost invisible. Carla vanished from their lives, as expected, because she'd never been there for love, only convenience. I could have felt vengeance or satisfaction, but all I felt was distance. They were no longer part of my story, or at least not the one I was writing now. I had learned to own my choices. I invested part of my earnings into improving my home, traveling, and treating myself to luxuries I once thought impossible. But above all, I invested in me, my health, my well-being, my future. I stopped carrying guilt that wasn't mine. Stopped feeling responsible for people who only used me. Freedom had a high price, yes, but it was worth every tear and every sleepless night. Looking back, I understood my mistake wasn't buying the house. It was believing family justifies everything. Not every blood tie means love. Not every sacrifice gets thanked. Sometimes you must choose between staying a victim or standing up and claiming your place in the world. I chose to stand, and though it hurt, it was the best decision of my life. On the night I completed a year living alone, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted to myself in the mirror. To your freedom, your dignity, and your new life, I said out loud. A simple gesture, but symbolic. The man in the mirror was no longer the Alberto who came home exhausted and humiliated from a work trip to find his family betraying him. He was someone who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more aware than ever. And so, with my eyes on the future, I understood that true family isn't always blood, but those who respect you, value you, and celebrate your victories. I had lost those who should have been by my side, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. The certainty that I would never again let anyone take what I'd fought so hard for. That night, in my home, free of debt and shadows, I finally understood what the word freedom means. Remember, if you enjoy my videos, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.